This program airs statewide on California Public Television and is a California's Gold classic. This series is endorsed by the California Teachers Association, the California School Boards Association, and the California Library Association. Hi, I'm Huell, and I'm standing here with my two new friends, Jerry and Vicki, from the Raptor Rehabilitation and Release Program here in Thousand Oaks, just a little bit out of Los Angeles. Now, Jerry is holding this beautiful golden eagle, and Vicki and I are here with two little mule deers. These are little fawns, and we're getting ready to give them their breakfast. Of course, the golden eagle and the mule deer are indigenous to California. They're natives. They're supposed to be here. As always, though, this adventure is going to be a little different because we're going in search of two examples of wildlife that live in California that aren't supposed to be here. They are definitely not native Californians. And if you're interested in what these two animals are, and more importantly, where we're going to find them, as always, you're invited to come along with us. We call this adventure Animals That Aren't Supposed to Be Here. And even though they aren't supposed to be here, they're still fine examples of California's gold. And now it's time for breakfast. There she goes. I think she's full. She's not... You know, it's always fun to go to Catalina Island, especially when you're traveling by helicopter. Of course, Catalina is one of our state's channel islands, located about 26 miles off our southern shores. We were there during the springtime. Everything was green. And on this particular helicopter trip, our pilot gave us an extra treat, flying us all around the island, and then showing us one of the most spectacular sights you can imagine. Look, we went right over this ridge, and bam! You're looking straight down these sheer cliffs right into the ocean. Now, this is on the southwest side of the island and is known as the Palisades. But as beautiful as all this was, we weren't heading to Catalina for a sightseeing trip. We were in search of buffalo. That's right, buffalo. And when you look up buffalo in an animal book, you find them under bison. And you find out that in America back in the 1800s, they were almost exterminated by hunters. You also find out that buffalo were never roaming around in California. They're not supposed to be here. But we'd also heard there were over 200 of them on Catalina, and that they were descendants of historic buffalo, first brought to the island back in the 1920s. Question was, why were they brought here? Well, we hadn't been on the island 10 minutes before we found ourselves right in the middle of a Catalina buffalo controversy. Well, we're standing here outside the Catalina Island Museum, which is located on the ground floor of the wonderful old casino here on the island. I'm standing with Patricia Moore, who's the head of the museum, and Bruce Poncell from the Island Conservancy. And I guess you all have heard why we're here.
I think you're here after buffalo.
We're here in search of buffalo. We hear there are buffalo on the island. Is that true?
There's a beautiful herd of buffalo on the island, yes.
But the controversy, the big question we're here to try to answer is, how did they get here? And what's the story?
Well, I've heard for years and years that they were brought over in 1924 by a movie company to make The Vanishing American, a silent film. And that's what I've been telling people. That's what the tour bus drivers tell people, and the local waitresses in the restaurants will tell people that too. But I got a hold of a copy of The Vanishing American, and I can't find any buffalo in it.
So the story was the buffalo were brought here in 1923. 24. To make a movie called The Vanishing American.
That's right, yes.
Now, we just happen to have a copy of that tape inside, right?
Yes.
So we're going to screen it and see for ourselves if there's a single buffalo in that film.
Okay, let's
All right,
go.
let's go. This is the Vanishing American, and this is the supposed Catalina buffalo film. And what are we seeing here, Pat?
You're seeing Arizona. You're seeing the Navajo Indian Reservation where the film was made.
In
Arizona.
In Arizona.
Not Catalina.
So there's nothing here.
There's nothing there that remotely resembles Catalina Island, and there certainly aren't any buffalo.
Now, have you screened the entire film?
I watched the entire film
Many times.
Twice, to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yes, and there aren't even places where there would be a place for a buffalo to be part of the action. Mm-hmm. It just isn't. It isn't a buffalo movie.
So how did this myth get started about the Vanishing American being the movie?
Our own local newspaper started it. In 1924, the arrival of the buffalo was delivered in the newspaper with photographs of the 14 buffalo that came. Then, and said they were probably going to be used in a movie in the spring. Then in January, there was another little notice in the newspaper that said the film company is going to be coming soon to film The Vanishing American and use the buffalo that are now on the island. And so people saw it in print, and no one ever saw the movie, and they just took the word of the newspaper, which must have made a mistake. So we're saddled with that, and we have this big mystery that I've been trying to solve for years.
Now we've hit the road, and Bruce, where are you taking us?
Well, we're going out into the interior of the island now, and we're going to go to an area around El Rancho Escondido, where I was told this morning we have a good-sized herd of our local buffalo and plenty of the calves we've been looking for also.
Now, is this good buffalo country? It looks too hilly to be buffalo country.
Yeah, this is a little too rugged, the area we're going through now. Once in a while they'll come down here if they get real hungry, but the majority of the time they stay more into the interior where we've got a lot of rolling hills and a lot of water for them to drink.
You know, I don't think most people realize that Catalina Island has this kind of topography to it.
Yeah, we have pretty good extremes in elevation. We have two peaks on the island that are around 2,200 feet, and then we've got a lot of spots in between which are 1,600, so we've got a lot of different areas.
And there are never any buffalo sightings down in here?
Not for a long time.
Boy, look at this. When another vehicle comes, somebody's got to make way, don't they?
Yeah, normally they give way to the one going uphill, but not in this case. He's bigger than I am.
Are we getting close?
Well, we've got a little bit more to go, but not too much farther. We can see him any time around here now.
Do they usually come out where you can see them?
Oh yeah, we'll see them along the road. Sometimes they're close, sometimes they're not, but we'll find some close to the road today, somewhere out here.
So they graze on this green grass in the springtime.
Right, this is all wild oats, and they eat this stuff. This is what they live on all throughout the year, most of the grasses.
Well, I sure hope our viewers are sticking with us, because this has been a pretty big build-up to see a buffalo.
Well, I sure hope we run into some for you.
Oh, you mean you're not sure we're going to find them?
No, we'll get you some out here. Herman's out here somewhere. We'll find them.
Well, I must admit I was a little nervous that we might not ever see any of these buffalo. But as it turned out, I didn't have to wait much longer, because we hooked up with Herman Saldana, the Catalina buffalo expert. And before I knew it, we were right in the middle of a whole herd of them. And I'm going to follow your lead, because this one is literally staring us down.
Right. Well, we don't want to get too close to him. We don't want to push our luck. She'll probably leave us, but we don't want to take a chance. They are very protective.
Now, so this is with their babies, is what you're saying?
This is with their babies, yeah. Yeah.
So are these all mothers and calves?
These are all mothers and their last year's calves with them here, with the little shorter horns there.
Boy, he likes to get down.
She's not even paying attention to us. Yeah, they're really real gentle animal over here.
Really?
We have a lot of tour buses stop and photograph them, and they'll get out and look at them. And so they're really, really gentle.
Tell us a little bit about these buffalo. What do they eat? How do they survive here on the island?
Well, they have the whole range of the island, more or less. There's no fences that hold them. We have to just keep an eye on them to make sure that they don't get into the different areas where people are located.
How many buffalo do you have?
Probably about 250 up to right now. Yeah. And looks like we're going to have a real good crop this year of calves. There's always something different about them.
What do you mean?
Well, you know, you don't know what they're going to do. They'll stay in one area for 2 days, and all of a sudden they're 5 miles away the next day. They roam. These are plains bison.
Well, where the buffalo roam.
Where they buffalo roam, yeah.
Now, would they roam? Would they go all the way up?
They'll go all the way up this mountain here, and then next day they might be down by the ocean.
By the ocean?
By the ocean.
Isn't that kind of strange, a buffalo by the ocean?
Not really. Not here in Catalina. If you would have been here yesterday, you would have seen them in the water.
In the ocean?
In the ocean, yeah.
Just cooling off?
Cooling off, yeah. They go in and take a little drink of salt water even.
You know, now that's something that's hard to conjure up in the lore of the Old West.
Yeah.
Is a buffalo swimming in the ocean.
Yeah, they do swim. They're good swimmers, real good swimmers.
Yeah, but the ocean?
Yeah, the ocean. And our reservoirs too. They go in our reservoirs and they'll go in for a little swim.
A buffalo stampede.
It's one of the main attractions on Catalina as far as the tourists. Everybody wants to see the buffalo when they come over.
Well, they're historic.
They are in a way, 1924, that's part of history.
What do the old timers on Catalina have to tell? What kind of tall buffalo tales do they have to tell?
One of the great buffalo stories I remember hearing, some years ago there was one of the old bulls that was pretty ornery. He would look for the school bus on the way to town from the Isthmus and take a charge at the bus every once in a while.
Well, the kids must have loved that.
Yeah, they'd watch for him and he'd be alongside the road and they'd have to watch for him because he'd come right at them, right out of the middle of nowhere.
Charging the school bus.
Right, I don't know if he could see that yellow or not, but he knew what that bus was.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of these stories, aren't there?
Yes, I think there was a buffalo that used to come down and visit the golf course. They called him Herman Hole in One. And my mother-in-law is a great golfer. And one day when she was out with the ladies, she had a ball that she was going to go find, and she heard this snuffle, snuffle, and looked up, and there was a buffalo. It was Herman looking at her. And so she kind of slowly moved back into the green. But
only in Catalina, when you're playing golf, do you have to be on the lookout for buffalo.
That's right.
I think that they're so much a part of our life that we don't think of them as strange and different. They belong to the island, and we enjoy them and don't think to tell people, oh yes, we have buffalo, because it's like saying, oh yes, we have a dog, or oh yes, we have a cat, or something.
You have buffalo here.
Right.
Even though they are not supposed to be here.
Right. And they're probably going to stay here a long time. They've made it their home.
Leaving our Catalina buffalo friends behind and continuing our search for animals that aren't supposed to be here, we next headed north on Interstate 5. Our destination, Fort Tejon State Historic Park, about 65 miles north of Los Angeles in Grapevine Canyon. Now, we were visiting Fort Tejon in search of camels. Now, this has to be one of the most bizarre, unusual, and colorful chapters out of California's history book. because even though we all know camels are supposed to live in Asia, North Africa, and the Middle East, some camels called California home for a few years back in the mid-1800s. It was all part of something the U.S. Army called the Great Camel Experiment, and it was a doozy. I'm interested in how the Army got the idea for bringing camels to California.
Well, it started in the early 1850s when several military and civilian personnel had been banting around the idea of using camels in the newly won territories from the war with Mexico. They understood that it was largely desert. The supply lines were non-existent or very sparse, and were unlike those back in the east where water was a simple means of transporting all the Army's equipment.
So the Army came up with the idea that since there was a lot of desert in the west, that the good old camel would work well out here.
They had read stories of how well the camels had been these great beasts of burden in the Sahara, and figured, hey, why not try it out in the American Southwest?
Now this was back in...
Well, this would be around 1853-54 time period that they started coming up with this idea, and finally it presented to Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, and he said, sure, sounds like a good idea, let's go with it, and dispatched some Navy personnel along with some government buyers to go to Turkey and to Egypt and purchase some camels.
And how did the camels get to California?
Well, that's a long story. Initially,
that's a long way.
It's a long walk as well. Initially, they brought the camels in through a port in Texas called Indianola. They were brought up to an Army post called Camp Verde, which is about 60 miles outside of San Antonio. There, they were given to some government contractors, Edward Fitzgerald Beald and Samuel Bishop, who were surveying a wagon road across this new territory. They needed to survey a new road to get immigrants to California. And they brought the camels and eventually brought them into California. And they'd use them to support this operation, the surveying operation, for approximately 3-4 years. It was known as the 35th parallel, or the Central Wagon Route, across what's now Arizona and New Mexico.
So they brought them in from Texas across New Mexico, Arizona, and then they arrived here at Fort Tejon.
Right. When they were done with their surveying, they went to Samuel Bishop's ranch, which was about 17 miles from Fort Tejon. And in the 1859 time frame, the Army started to say, hey, you civilians, you've got our camels, we want them back now. So finally, in November 17th of 1859, Beale and Bishop brought the camels finally back to the Army, and they were brought here to Fort Tejon. There were approximately 29. At first there were 3 missing, but they found them because the camel tends to graze and just keeps wandering and wandering, and will wander for miles in search of forage. And they don't care where they are, they're just looking for some green grass.
Now wonder what the dragoons thought when 29 camels came parading in.
They were aware of the camel experiment as it was known back then. They were cognizant of the fact that the Army had imported these camels, and that the camels were here in California being used by these civilian contractors. They probably turned their nose up to them a bit. They didn't ride them or anything. They weren't used in an operational sense, and in fact the dragoons here at Fort Tejon never did use the camels.
So they never rode the camels, because let's be honest, when we found out that we were going to have a camel here today, I thought I was going to be riding a camel into the fort, and you said no, I couldn't do that if I wanted to be historically correct.
That's true. The camels, I mean, there's been a lot of myth and a lot of storytelling, and true, in popular fiction, the great dragoon gathers up his bulging mail pouch, grabs his carbine and saber, jumps upon his steedy ship of the desert, and rides off against through the hostile Indians and so forth. But it never happened. It's pure bunk. The government did own the camels, but here in California, the civilians use them. These 2 gentlemen that I mentioned that were surveying wagon routes, they're the ones that used the camels, and the Army did not.
So they were just here.
They were brought here because it was the nearest place that the government was at, and since they were government property, they wanted the camels back.
Yeah.
And also during the late 1850s, there was a lot of drought going on in California. And here we are about 4,000 feet in the mountains, and this was a good area to bring a camel that ate a lot of expensive hay and barley and oats. They went through a lot more feed than a usual horse or mule.
So
And
what you're saying is the Army really didn't know what they were getting into.
Well, true. I mean, it was an experiment to see how it worked. In many respects, the camel proved that it could carry great amounts of equipment and supplies over great distances. But the failings of the camel were that, as you can see, he has soft padded feet.
Yeah.
Not like a mule or a horse who has a hoof that you could put a horseshoe on. And they work great in the sands of the Sahara.
Yeah.
But in the American Southwest, where you do have some sand, but it's mostly rocky.
Yeah.
And they were footsore. They got very footsore real quick.
What do you think about this camel being part of your...
It disturbs my animals, and I prefer that it wasn't on my post.
Yeah.
It's odd, it's strange. The Army says it's supposed to replace my mules. I don't quite see it, not a bit. None of our pack saddles are going to fit it. The men aren't used to it. The horses aren't used to it. It's an odd experiment.
Yeah.
It's an odd experiment. Thank goodness they're not going to have us actually climb on these things.
There is a smell to this camel, isn't
Absolutely.
there?
Sure, she has a distinctive smell.
And there is a look and a noise.
Yeah,
that they
she'll make a noise.
Whoa!
She'll make a noise. Push.
Oh my gosh.
Here, push down.
Oh goodness.
That's the way they rest. That's the way they rest. That's the way, if you're going to saddle them.
Oh my gosh.
She won't complain for you. She will for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm her boss, so.
And this is it. Camels were in California,
That's correct.
but not very long.
No.
When they left here, they went where? They were here how long?
They were here for about 14 to 16 months. They were actually on the post proper for a little over 4 months. Then they were put on some government-rented grazing area about 8 to 12 miles from the post. There they remained until the fort was abandoned in mid-1861. And the dragoons, because at the same time, 1861, we have the Civil War starting back east. So the Army was trying to gather up its forces that were primarily west of the Mississippi and get them back to the east to fight this new war. So the dragoons pulled out and headed down to Los Angeles. The camels came with them, and they went to what was becoming a quartermaster operation at Drum Barracks, which is in Wilmington, California.
And they stayed there how long?
They stayed there for about 2 years when the government finally gave up with the whole idea.
Just kind of standing around.
Well, they tried running express, which at the time meant mail, out to some of the isolated posts out in the desert.
With the camels.
With the camels.
Like a pony express, only with camels.
Similar. They tried it 3 times, and the first one, they got one of the civilian camel drivers to hop on with the mail and ride from Wilmington out towards Camp Cady and Fort Mojave, which is out past like Daggett, out there, way out in the middle of the desert. And he rode him in the ground literally, and he died. What was then known as fish ponds, now known as Daggett. He grabbed the mail pouch and walked the rest of the way. Tried it a second time, and he got about as far as Barstow. Camel died there as well. And then they tried one last time, and he didn't get very far, San Bernardino. And then they said, forget it. We might be able to use him to run between Wilmington and Los Angeles. Tried that out, wasn't too successful. By that time they'd had it, and they marched him up along the coast to Benicia, which is in the Bay Area. And there the Army auctioned off all of them at a loss to the government. And some civilian enterprises bought them. A couple circuses bought the camels.
This was in?
This would be in 1864-65.
So the whole thing, oh look, we're feeding the camel. Oh. So the whole thing lasted 5 or 6 years from start to finish and really never got going.
No. The camel experiment pretty much was through experimenting when they got here to California, and they were just government property that the Army and the government really didn't quite know what they were going to do with it.
And we know how hard it is to get rid of government property,
Yes.
so they kept it another 4 or 5 years and then sold them.
Right.
Which brings in, camel owner, you were telling me a great story. You've born and raised in this area, and you said as a young man you saw camels.
No, when I was a kid, I went to school here in the early 50s, there were supposed to be camels still left on Fort Tejon. Now, you know, you never knew if that was the truth or not. I know there are still Thule elk on the ranch.
Oh, so you never saw him?
No, I never saw them, but that was always the story that we were told when we were students here in school, that, you know, if we were bad, we'd get strapped to a camel that lived out in the back on the
So
fort.
see, this myth continues
Certainly does.
because I'd heard as late as the 1940s there were wild camels spotted out in the Mojave Desert, descendants of these original camels.
Well, actually, the camels, after they were auctioned off in Benicia, I mentioned some of the circuses bought them, and there was a circus that had some of these former government-owned camels that went out of business in the Tucson area of Arizona, and they let loose a lot of their animals. So it's been theorized that some of the camels that were reported being seen in the deserts actually may have been either descendants or the camels that had been let loose when this circus went out of business in Tucson.
Well, this is all very interesting. We have recreated a little bit of history here. In a way, it's kind of poignant that after 130 years, a camel is back at Fort Tejon, where they were back in the 1850s. The great camel experiment, which really was a big flop, but it's a very, very colorful part of California's history and very much an example. Well, I never thought I'd say that looking at a face like this. Very much an example of California's gold. An animal that's here in California that's not supposed to be here. This has been a lot of fun, and there you have it, an up-close and personal look at two animals that are very much a part of California history, even though they have absolutely no business being here. The Catalina buffalo and the Fort Tejon camel, both fine examples of California's gold. Well, hello everybody, I'm Huell Hauser, and I sure hope you enjoyed this adventure. If you'd like to see it again or share it with your family or friends, or perhaps donate a copy to your local school or library, it's available on video cassette and on DVD. All you have to do is call 1-800-266-5727, and we'll be glad to send it to you right away.